What if one simple question could completely change the way you see your future? That's exactly what happened the first time I spoke with today's guest. He's a physician, coach, author, podcaster, and someone who's played a pivotal role in my journey. Stick around because the question he asked me and the way he helped me answer it just might be exactly what you need right now. Well, hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Better Physician Life podcast. Today, I am super excited to welcome Dr. Jimmy Turner to the show. He is a practicing academic anesthesiologist and associate professor at Wake Forest University School of Medicine, where he specializes in regional anesthesia and acute pain medicine. Beyond the clinical setting, Jimmy is a certified coach who has helped tons of fellow physicians, including me, navigate things like burnout, mindset, and money. He's 100% the reason we are sitting here and chatting today. But wait, there's more. He's also the author of Determined: How Burned Out Doctors Can Thrive in a Broken Medical System. And he co-hosts the podcast Money Meets Medicine, where he brings honest, practical conversations about personal finance into the physician space. He's also a licensed insurance agent, helping physicians navigate the confusing process of disability insurance. And I could not be happier to have him here on the show today. Welcome, Dr. Jimmy Turner.
Thanks so much, man. I'm super excited to be here. I know we've been trying to get this one on the book for a little bit, so couldn't be more excited.
Absolutely. It's quite a list of accomplishments. Did I leave anything out?
I'm sure there are things you left out somewhere in there. I live a pretty crazy life. Most people ask me, probably the most common question I get is like, how do you do all these things? And the answer is quite simply, I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, to get to the bottom of that answer, people would have to ask our wives, right?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I like when people say they married a better half, like I legitimately did that. My wife is like a living saint. She's a substantially better human being than I am. And I am thrilled that she decided to call me her husband.
100%. Same. So you and I go way back. I was reading your work and listening to your podcast long before I signed up for physician coaching back in 2020. And I had already learned so much from you, but one of the most impactful moments actually came in our very first conversation. We were talking about whether or not I was going to sign up for physician coaching, and I was super skeptical. And honestly, I had pretty much already decided my answer was no. And then you asked me a question that made me stop and think, right? And that question was this: if you don't do this, what will change? And up until that moment, I had a pretty firm belief that people don't change. But that one simple question cracked the door open and made me see possibility in a way I hadn't really seen it before. Now, when I look at all you've done, your accolades, your pivots, your willingness to evolve, it seems pretty clear that this is something you've leaned into for a lot of your life. Has this always been a part of who you are?
Yeah, it's such a funny thing. First of all, I will say skepticism towards coaching is completely healthy. And I think that's where 99% of us start. So
Yeah.
if you were listening to the show and you're like, I'm skeptical about this physician coaching, you're probably in the right spot. And all of us that ended up getting into it from the client standpoint and then the coaching standpoint, we were skeptical to begin with too. So a completely healthy space to be. But to answer your question, no. And I'm kind of glad that I didn't always operate this way. So if I had found really what turned that key for me in my brain was entrepreneurship. And it was through entrepreneurship that I started learning lessons that nowhere else in life could I learn. And so for me, I didn't experience entrepreneurship until about 6 months after my fellowship in regional anesthesia. And so I'm really glad actually that it turned out that way, because if I had found entrepreneurship when I was in training, I don't know that I would have finished becoming a physician. It's become a huge part of my identity, to be honest with you, and the way that I think about things and the way I think about the world, and realize like, hey, just because we do things a certain way and we've always done them that way doesn't mean it has to continue to be that way. And if you find a problem, then a solution is probably necessary. And it turns out that's often a really great business idea. And so for me, embracing change came through the process of starting a blog and then realizing, hey, it's probably not the best idea in the world for the dyslexic kid with a reading disability to have a blog. You can't spell, right? And so I was like, maybe podcasting was a better idea, because it turns out that my voice is better than my writing, and people get to know and like and trust you more if they hear your voice than if they're reading your writing. And so it's been a constant evolution of finding what I enjoy, what I'm good at, what I'm not good at. being honest about what brings me peace, what brings me happiness and fulfillment. And that is often at odds with what other people think you should be doing. And so I have embraced change in all of the different aspects of authorship and podcasting and being in venture capitalism for a year and personal finance and burnout and coaching for physicians. All of that stuff has really just been about me trying to find my path and trying during that process to enjoy the journey. Because ultimately for me, I was the classic arrival fallacy junkie where it's like, oh, if I do this, the next thing, that's what's going to make me happy. If I start a business and the business makes $100,000, like that's a big number. And that'll help with me being able to cut back from medicine because I was burned out in medicine. And then I did that and it turns out it wasn't the answer. And I was like, well, maybe if I start a podcast, or what if I, get to this number in the business, or if I write a book. And really all of it was a constant evolution to teach me that it's more important to focus on the process than the product. You have to enjoy the journey. But I'm glad that I did embrace that because now it gives me the ability to face things and to make decisions without being scared that I'm going to fall flat on the other side, which is the constant fear most people have is getting started.
Yeah. I noticed what you said when you were just mentioning this is that it sometimes goes against what people think you should be doing. Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, sure. And so, this is germane to the podcast and the topic at hand, right? So when I started coaching, I was probably the only male physician coach in the space that had a large audience. And so constantly I was being told, oh, this is going to be nothing but success for you. You're going to join the 2 Comma Club, have $1 million recurring revenue business because you are a male physician, which is unique to the space. Dudes need coaching too. Obviously, all the women already were much smarter than us and knew that from the get-go. And so, hey, you're just going to succeed. And so this is what you should do. You should continue to build this business. And for me, I got to the point where I was like, you know what? I really enjoy these conversations. I really enjoy writing about this stuff, thinking about the stuff. But like, I'm a content producer at the end of the day. Like, I love teaching. Like, at the end of the day, I went into academics because I'm an academic. I love educating other people. And my special space is in content production and having conversations with people. Sometimes that means coaching, and sometimes it means just focusing on the educational aspect of stuff and like, how can I get this in front of more people? And so having people point at me and say, hey, this is what you should do because you can, and realizing that, oh, just because I can doesn't mean I should. Those are different questions. Really took me a long time to figure out. My journey, taking that pivot, actually didn't happen until I got into the venture capital back startup space and brought my personal finance brand into that. And that ended my coaching business for the most part at that point. And to be honest, when that happened, I was relieved. I was happy. I was like, you know what? This has been a monkey on my back for so long that everyone expects me to keep carrying, and I don't want to carry this thing anymore. And because I made that pivot, I just didn't have time for it. It forced me to make that change. But yeah, that's probably the most relevant example to this. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, is the takeaway there that I learned from that.
I think this is really important because if you're listening and you don't own a coaching business, maybe you're thinking this isn't relevant to the life that we're living. And most physicians feel the exact same way about their medical careers, right? They push through in certain aspects of their career because they think they should. There's this expectation about what, I've talked before about what a good doctor does. A good doctor, shows up every day and does all of the things and closes their charts and sees 30 patients a day and doesn't complain, and all of these expectations of what other people think we should be doing in our medical careers. And it's fascinating to me to hear you talk about the same experience in the entrepreneurial space, because it just goes to show we're not immune to this, right? Like leaving one space or pivoting to a different space doesn't mean all of these problems or issues or concerns magically disappear. They just show up in a different way.
Yeah, I think that in medicine, to your point, this is most common when physicians have the experience of having their altruism being taken advantage of. To your point, like, hey, a good doctor does this, a good doctor does that. It took me a really long time to realize that, and my wife has this saying. My wife has several just beautiful sayings that have profoundly impacted me. And she is not the person that came up with these things. She's just the one that I hear it the most from. But, the idea that like clear is kind, right? So that might mean setting expectations for people and being really clear about what those expectations are. And that's actually not mean. It's not rude. You're not putting people off. You're just saying, hey, like this is my expectation for me, and this doesn't currently meet that. And so I'm not going to do that. It's not a priority to me, right? That's not mean. You're being clear. And so when we have this idea of like, what is a good physician and what is a good physician supposed to do? it's really easy to take advantage of that because really at the end of the day, you get to decide what a good doctor is, right? Like this ideal that's pitched at us is pitched by other people, and you get to decide what that means for you. And for me in my journey, ultimately that was the problem, is that I just didn't spend enough time really thinking about what do I want. And I don't mean that from like a selfish standpoint. I mean like a lack of clarity standpoint. I just didn't know. I just knew I was having success at these different things and I was dabbling in lots of different stuff. I didn't have enough time in the day to do all of those things. So some of them started getting done not as well as I would have liked them. And really, what I needed at the time and what that pivot basically required was for me to step back and say, what do I want? And it turns out for me, I like simplicity. I like being busy. I like being productive and I like things to be simple. I don't want to be, in all of these different things. And so I'm constantly getting involved in stuff and then asking myself, like, how can I refine this to make this more simple? Like maybe this thing that I decided I could do isn't really what I want to do. It doesn't really fit the mold for what I have in my view for my life right now. But at the end of the day, I think that most of us get put in that space because we are living up to someone else's ideal of what we should look like. And we haven't really spent enough time thinking about our own ideals of who we are and what our goals are and what our purpose is on this crazy thing called Earth. And for me, it wasn't until I was forced to take that step back that I started having some of that realization.
I think for a lot of us, that's when it happens. It is when we are forced to do it. Do you have any ways that you have found work for you in terms of checking in every once in a while to figure out if the stuff that you're doing still fits with the life that you want? Any recommendations?
Yeah, for me, a lot of the time, this really comes down to, and this isn't super scientific and maybe not the most helpful, but I think we all get a sense of a feeling that we are, and for me, the feeling is often overwhelm. And I'm sure that you talk about this, on the show in terms of how completely unproductive that particular emotion is. And for me, I get to a space of overwhelm. I'm like, I have all of these things to do. And when I back up, I'm like, to your point, like, if you keep doing the same things are going to happen, right? I'm like, well, what is the alternative? The alternative in this situation is that I'd be bored. And for anybody that knows me, like I hate boredom more than I hate about just anything. I do not do well with it. Yes, that means I got lots of internal work that I need to do. I'm aware, but I hate boredom. I've always hated boredom. I like being productive. And so sometimes I'm like, you know what? I'm okay living on this like closer to the overwhelm side of the spectrum because I know that I'd rather be busy than be bored. But for me, there's definitely a clear point where it's like, okay, this is overwhelming enough that this is an issue. I now need to have goals, thoughtful discussion with myself or with others to figure out, okay, you're doing 7 things. How many of these can we actually fit and do life well? And so for me, it usually starts with a feeling, and that feeling is what causes me to take a deep dive and get clarity on my hell yes policy, I like to call it, right? And so I get really clear on what are the things that matter most to me. So we were talking before we hit record about busy life and busy schedules, and sometimes things at work aren't the way that I would love them to be, and corporate America and harmonization and all this stuff as my hospital has been acquired and merged and all the other things that have happened with consolidation in healthcare. And some of that results in a job that I don't like certain aspects of. And I have to back up and say, yeah, but the job that I have right now does provide some things on my hell yes policy that are pretty high up there, like probably number one, which is I have more control over my time with my current job, despite some of the things that I don't love about it, than I would with most anesthesia jobs. And so by stepping back and saying, like, I know I don't like feeling overwhelmed. I know I don't like this current space that I'm in, but what are the good parts of what I'm doing right now? And what do I have to do to maintain that? Right. And if it's like outside the list, like, well, in order to maintain your current schedule, you need to continue to do these 3 things. Like, okay, well, I guess those 3 things need to stay on this list for now because my number one priority is making it to baseball games and football practice and flute and all the stuff that my kids do and support my wife. And so really it's getting super, super clear on what are my priorities and then what are the things that I need to do in my life that have to happen to make that be a possibility. And then I try to get rid of everything else. And I go through like this declutter phase after I go through that process, typically where I'm like, you know what? I'm doing 10 things. I'm now doing 4. And people are like, Jimmy, why aren't you doing that anymore? Like you were really good at that. And I'm like, cause it doesn't fit right now. Maybe it will later, but it doesn't right now. Right. And so it's this constant reevaluation process that typically starts when I start to feel overwhelmed.
Yeah. And I think you call to mind a couple of very essential points here. Number one is that our minds are always geared towards what's going wrong and the negative, and so easy to look at our jobs and see all the things that we don't like. And there's a lot of things that we do like. And I speak
Mhm.
to this from personal experience about my own job and am frequently reminding myself about all the things that I do enjoy, that I do like. The reason why, even 5 years into coaching, I'm still in the same job I've been in for over 16 years now. And so
Mhm.
it is really making sure that we're always critically appraising, right? Like what's good also, right? Like what is working. And then you also brought up your hell yes policy, which I love and I read about in advance, but you just said it like everybody knows it. And I'd love for you to say more about that because I think it's critical.
Yeah. So essentially, it's the concept that you need to get really clear on what your priorities are. And where this came from for me was actually reading a book called Essentialism, Greg McKeown. And in that book, he tells a story about basically how the word priority was originated. And I think it was in the 1700s, like the word priority. So think about a priori. Priority meant like the one thing above all others. And at some point past the 1700s, we decided to try to make that word plural, as if you could have more than one thing in your life that was above all others. And it's kind of snowballed from there, right? Where we all think, oh, I can juggle all of these balls in the air and they're all priorities. And it's like, that's not really true. When you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And so we need to spend time making sure the things we're saying yes to are really like hell yes. And anything that doesn't make you say hell yes, you say no to, right? And so for me, it's really drilling down into like, what are the 3 to 5 things that are really most important and critical to me right now at this moment in my life? I have a high schooler, a middle schooler, and an elementary school. 3 different schools, 3 different physical locations for the next 3 years. And, it's like for me, scheduling flexibility to like make that zone defense work. My wife is a full-time educator. She has a job. She works. She's amazing at it. Just won teacher of the year for the county. And so like I totally want to support her career, but that also means that we have to play lots and lots of zone defense. And so for me, that hell yes policy, when I start thinking about what are the 3 to 5 things, it's like, okay, well, number one is having flexibility in my schedule to allow for all of these other things in my life that matter so much more than my job, right? Like I'm a God-fearing husband and father before I am anything else. And so that for me is like, okay, that's number one. And then, there are a few other things that end up on that list. But basically, what ends up happening after you come up with those 3 to 5 things, and you can start with 10 and try to whittle it down, it can become hard going backwards because you're like, no, I absolutely can't take off number 9. It's like, well, if you started with 1, it'd be easier to get to 3 or 5, personally, I think. But that said, you're going to find that if you keep saying yes and that hell yes policy keeps getting longer and longer and longer, you're really saying no to things at the top of the list because you have too many commitments, you have too many things going on. But it also allows me to check back and say, okay, well, if scheduling flexibility and autonomy over my personal time is the most important thing right now, then maybe I shouldn't go look for private practice jobs where I have quote unquote more professional autonomy because I'm a part of the group and the decision making there. Whereas as an employed physician, I'm not, because that's not really going to allow me to achieve that number one goal on my hell yes policy list. And so the process of getting really clear on what your priorities are, those things that really are above all others, that needs to be 3 things, maybe 5 if I'm being generous. And then your job is to say no to anything else that doesn't make it that list. Right. So that for me is like why I don't coach anymore. I like coaching. I enjoy having conversations with people. I enjoy getting to know people and building relationships. People have come to me for advice my entire life, and I don't coach anymore, even though I am a certified coach. Because right now, at this very moment in my life, maybe it'll change in the future, that just doesn't fit the list. And so just because you can doesn't mean you should. And that hell yes policy helps you kind of figure out the difference.
Yeah. And to your point, the items on that list can change. Just because you've said hell yes to something at one point in your life does not mean you have to continue saying yes to it. You get to, as your life grows and evolves, shift the things that are on your list. And I think that is something that we have a hard time doing because we feel like if we've said yes once, we need to keep saying yes. And I think what a lot of people, physicians in particular, don't realize is that if you say no to something, it feels like it could be uncomfortable, right? And so the yes feels easy, right? But when you say yes to escape the discomfort of no, you don't escape saying no. It's just the person that you're saying no to is typically the priorities that are on your hell yes list. It's yourself, it's your family, it's the places that you want to be, it's how you want to be showing up. And so you've said yes to the person that was asking you to do the thing, but you said no to you and the things you actually wanted to be doing.
Yeah. So, Michael, you'll be proud of me. So, for the first time in almost 40 years of existence, I turned 40 next month as we're recording this. I sent back a meal at a restaurant And so people are like normal that are listening to this. You're like, what? Why is that a big deal? So I'm like, by every definition, like a recovering people pleaser. And so it was the first time I ordered a meal and it was so bad. Like I even asked my friends at the table, I was like, am I making this up? Like, this is bad, right? And they're like, please do not eat that, you know? And so I like called the server over. I was like, hey, excuse me, is this what I ordered? You know, and had a conversation with her about it and sent it back. And the chef actually came out and apologized because it was so bad. But like the reason why is because historically comes from a good place. I was just so concerned with making other people happy and putting other people above myself. I was raised in a house where you're supposed to be selfless. And what I didn't realize is that some of the other values that I have for me personally, like integrity and honesty, like everyone will tell you, I am the sort of person where I am transparent to a fault. Part of what comes with that is that I am honest. So if you want an honest opinion on something, ask me. If you don't, please don't, because I will actually tell you what I think. And so I wasn't being honest with myself in those moments, right? Where it's like, this meal is terrible. Like I should have no reservations to be like, hey, respectfully, I'm going to get something else. This isn't what I expected. But for so many physicians, I think that they are also people pleasers and they are more worried about people pleasing other people and saying, I should say yes here. Maybe the no is uncomfortable, but maybe also what's uncomfortable is the idea you might not make someone happy. Because for me, that was always the hesitance about it was, hey, Jimmy, we're doing the social media thing. We're going to teach other people like how to build a brand and how to, you know, do that sort of thing. And so I know you've got thousands of people that follow you. I'd love to have you come and talk at this thing about social media so other physicians can learn about building their own brand. And just getting to this space where it took me years to like look that person in the eyes and be like, I am so appreciative that you would think of me. But no, I can't do that. It's not a priority for me at the moment. And you know what? Amazingly, on the other side of that, I found the majority of the time, if you're talking to a reasonable human being, it's they don't get mad at you or upset. They actually have respect for you because they probably have a hard time doing the same thing. Like, I can't believe you just said no. Like, you just told me no. Like, people don't tell people no. Like, man, I wish I could do that. You know, like that's kind of the response I get most of the time, to be honest with you, is people be like, I wish I could be that clear about what my priorities are and tell other people no. Because we're just so used to people saying yes. Right. But that is something I struggled with for, I don't know, 98% of my life that I've only recently developed a skill set in.
Well, congratulations. I appreciate that you're able to put that in past tense. I'm a working in progress, as Ted Lasso might say.
I totally get it.
But yeah, I mean, and it all does feed back to that shoulding that we talked about at the beginning of the episode, the expectations, like what other people think we should be doing and what we think we should be doing. We think we should just be saying yes to every opportunity. In medical education and medical culture, you don't say no. You say yes to opportunities. And if you keep doing that, we burn ourselves out, as we are seeing across medical culture right now, that we do have to reserve some space for ourselves.
Yeah, I think Brene Brown is the one that said, you know, shooting yourself into shame, right? And that ultimately is the result that is produced when you have these should statements that you're expressing. I think what's hard, and honestly, I'll give you an example, right? So Wesley has football practice tomorrow. Yes, I'm a physician. Yes, I let my kid play football. You can send me judgmental emails. It's okay. I'll accept them. And then there's also a Wake Forest NC State football game tomorrow at the time of recording this. And so I've literally been sitting there all day, like, should we go to practice because he has practice and we've committed to that? Or should we go to the game, which both of us want to do more? And there's like this constant battle between like commitments that we've made and desires that we have and what wins out. And I think it's an interesting process to think through. And in fact, one of the other coaches on the team is like, nah, man, like me and my kid, like we're skipping practice. We're going to the game, you know? And he just like sends it in the group text and it's just not a thing for him. He like does not care. He's like, hey, other coach, I know you're going to send me an Instagram back, but I just want you to know me and my kid won't be there. And I'm like, I've been deliberating about this for 72 hours, right? Like, what do I do? And if I do it, what do I say? And I think it really does come down to oftentimes our commitments and our desires are at odds with each other. And they produce these should statements, and those should statements lead to shame, which is really, really hard because there isn't like a right thing to do in those moments. And if we always let our desires win over the commitments that we've made, that's obviously not a great place to be, in my opinion. But if we always let the commitments that we've made be ironclad and they can never change because once you say yes to something, it has to stay yes forever, that's obviously also not a healthy place to live. And so for me, like living in that awkward tension in between those two things is where I find myself quite often.
Yeah. And what I notice about your story is that when somebody else leads the way, it becomes easier, right? When they set an example that it's okay to say, like, my kid's not coming to practice, we're going to do this other thing. It becomes easier for us to be like, yeah, me too. And
Right.
in a lot of ways, you have also kind of led that charge in entrepreneurship for physicians, right? Like you have become an example of how physicians can lean into entrepreneurship. And when I first met you, not an entrepreneurial bone in my body, never a single desire to run a business or figure out how to do all of this stuff. And here we are 5 years later, as I try to navigate what it is to be a business owner and how to do all of these things that honestly I never wanted to learn. And I'm so glad to be here learning how to do it all. It's brought a level of fulfillment back to my life that I didn't realize I was missing. How do you feel? What do you recommend or encourage or invite physicians to think about physician entrepreneurship?
Yes. First of all, I want to say, like, I'm super proud of you. Like, watching your journey has been so fun. And, taking you from the shell that you were in at the very beginning and like cracking out of that and like, okay, I'm going to explore this world of talking to other people. Right. And I'm going to explore coaching. And then you're like, you know what? I think I'm going to do coaching too. And then, joining and like having that coaching process with other coaches and then going and starting your own thing. I think that's such a cool journey to follow and something that you should be so proud of. Entrepreneur is always such an awkward topic for me. And I'm going to tell you why, because I think being an entrepreneur is harder than being a physician. And it is infinitely more stressful in my world. Maybe not harder than being a physician. That's not the right word, but it is infinitely more stressful to me than doing anesthesia, where when I make mistakes, people die. So, let's just paint the picture there, right? It is not for the faint of heart. That said, entrepreneurship, because of that, also teaches you lessons that nothing else in life will teach you. And so if you are of the more stoic philosophy that the obstacle isn't in the way, the obstacle is the way to success, and actually working through difficulties and things that are hard often produce the best things in your life, then I would say, even though I just painted that terrible picture of entrepreneurship being super stressful, all of that stress that comes from entrepreneurship teaches you so many things about life, about you, about dealing with negotiations and tough conversations, how to say no, how not to cast blame, or how to figure out where to go when there's no map, right? So to your point, like, I didn't really have anybody for the most part to follow in the business that I was creating. Like, I had a personal finance business. The tagline was originally fighting burnout with financial independence. So I always married wellness with personal finance. I was a personal finance blogger who then stepped into the wellness space with coaching. And I was trying to live in these kind of two worlds and make them mesh. And for so long, a lot of that really led to a lot of existential difficulties in my head. Like, these things don't go together, right? But to everyone else externally, they're like, no, this makes tons of sense, Jimmy. This is great. And I'm over here like really struggling for 2 years and like, I'm like, what? How do these two worlds meet and that sort of thing? But like, going through that process allowed me to learn so much about me and my journey. And maybe you could have a similar experience if you were a true private practice owner building a business, brick and mortar, and you're having to advertise and you're having to build funnels and find patients and that sort of thing. I think that experience used to actually happen more often in medicine now than it does now. But for me, it really is the process of learning how to be comfortable with being uncomfortable at the end of the day. That's what entrepreneurship taught me. And if you're willing to do that, the benefits on the other side can be amazing.
Yeah. It has been my argument that physicians have always been entrepreneurs for the exact reason that you were just laying out, that you used to hang up a shingle and have to find a way to advertise to patients to come and find you. And over the years, as we've been fed that, doctors are bad at business and let me do that for you, I will make this so much easier. You can focus on the thing that you are trained for. We lost an essential piece of what continued to provide fulfillment, right? As somebody who's, more than 20 years after graduating from medical school, don't tell anybody, I've seen most things, right? I haven't seen everything, but I've seen most things, and I've seen most things a lot of times. And so,
Mhm.
there starts to become a time where it's like, okay, just like more of the same thing. And I think that that's what entrepreneurship has brought back into my life that I didn't realize was missing, was this ability to learn new things, to try, to fail, which is hard to admit. It's hard to do and fail publicly, right? Where other people are watching you fail and you just get to just go back to it and keep going because it's the thing that you want to be doing.
I've done that so many times.
And yes, right. And if you want to be in this space, right, the man in the arena quote, I know is a quote that speaks to both of us. Yes. Like the only person who gets to judge are the other people who are in the arena fighting the fight, right? Because other people can be in the stands watching and judging. But the real work, the real credit goes to the people who are fighting in the arena.
Yeah, it's something that you can only learn if you are in the arena. And classic example of this, right? So if we're talking about online entrepreneurship, like there are cartoons now, right? Movies, right? That make fun of this and say, hey, like, don't go look at the comment section, right? But for some of us, like, we learn that in real life. And at the end of the day, like, you really have to, that's another skill set, right? Like, you have physicians that get these online reviews and yet they don't know how to deal with them. And the reason why is because that skill set's never really been developed for them. And yet in the online space, like, you have infinitely more, particularly if you have a larger platform, like, you have infinitely more comments and negative things that people can say, no matter how you say something. Like, I shared a story one time on a podcast. I'm gonna share it again, and then you can get the negative reviews because this is your show. I had this prior resident of mine that was going to work, and as he was going to work, hit a deer. This person just happened to be like a super, super outdoorsy hunter kind of guy. And he got out of the car. This deer is in agony, like, clearly going to die. And so this resident is going to take out a knife. He has a hunting knife on him and, give the animal some peace. Right. And this woman stops and she starts screaming at him that, he can't do that. Like, we got to get to this deer to the hospital. And he's like, the neck is broken. Like, this is not a salvageable situation. So anyway, like, long story short, I share this story on my podcast, and inevitably there's like some comment about, hey, like, I can't believe that, there's a story and like there's this woman and he was saying like how crazy she was. I was like, first of all, I didn't say she was crazy. I was saying like she was clearly having a very difficult time with this person trying to provide this end of life to this deer. And so, like, if you live in this space, like, you can like share stories that you think are completely benign and safe and fine, but there's always going to be the hater that's out there. And I didn't learn how to deal with that stuff, like negative criticism. I always struggled with that so much my entire life until basically entrepreneurial work taught me, if you are successful, you are going to have haters. Right? That is just a part of the process. And so you cannot wade into these waters and expect to like come out with no bruises or battle scars. That's just not something that is going to happen. And yet, every time that something like that happens, I think, man, this would be really helpful for doctors that have, because I'm an anesthesiologist, I don't get online reviews, but I know some doctors get online reviews. Maybe in my world, the closest is like pain physicians who have a certain patient population that you can imagine leaves scathing reviews online. And they have a hard time with it because, like, no, like, I'm a good doctor. I'm trying to do the right thing. And I can't believe this person left this review. And for me, like, I never would have learned that skill set of dealing with criticism, like true criticism, public criticism, where people are saying terrible things about you, if it weren't for entrepreneur work. And at the same time, like, I'm incredibly grateful for that because it's a skill set that I now have where it's like, you know what? Maybe that person's having a bad day. Like, I don't know. Like, there's all sorts of narratives that I can spin now that I have skills to deal with and say, you know what? Maybe this person is having a bad day. This wasn't their best moment. I'm sure that I've said things in my life too that are not kind about other people, right? And I can provide that person grace and just completely release it from like having any meaning on my life. But it's, to your point, the sort of thing that you have to be in the arena to experience both the difficulties of it, but also the amazing benefits that come from doing this kind of work. Even if you fail, you will learn, which is ultimately the goal. And you reminded me something earlier too about just, the idea of growth. I think that for me, that's what I see most physicians really struggle with is they get to that mid-career spot and they're like, I have seen these things over and over and over again. And it really is just becoming, second nature to me. And they get bored and they have this inkling in the back of their mind, like, I need to make a change. I need to do something different. And really what that is, that human beings are meant to grow. You're meant to change. You're meant to do something different. You're meant to learn. It reminds me of, The Man's Search for Meaning, in that book, and just the idea that, like, the people in the concentration camp that didn't make it, assuming that they, beat the odds of landing in a destination where they didn't find an end otherwise, like, they typically where they lost their purpose. They didn't have a meaning for life. They didn't have a reason to grow. And you see this in retirees when they retire and they become depressed and all that sort of stuff. And so if you have that inkling, you have that itch, sometimes the best way to scratch it is through entrepreneurship, where the entire idea is you see a problem, go create a solution and try to fix it.
Yeah. I love that. I know. As we're talking, we're both thinking about all of these other things. So I will say, I started out also with blogging. And I remember the first time somebody commented on one of my blogs and called me a quack, which was the
Mhm.
first time in my life I had ever been called a quack. And I remember you telling me, you can be ignored or you can have haters. You get to choose, right? Like,
Yep.
nobody knows you exist, right? Or you can have haters. Those are the two options. And so
Yep.
I would much rather get a negative comment and people know that my work is out there and that I'm doing my part than just to be ignored and fading in the background. And then going back to what you were just saying. So what advice would you give somebody who is aching toward like the boredom and trying to figure out like maybe physician entrepreneurship, maybe not, I don't know. What do you suggest? Where do people start?
So it depends on what they're trying to do. I think the worst place to be is what I call a jobby, right? So if you're creating entrepreneurship to create cash flow, to create revenue in your life, obviously that is, let's just call it a job, even though it's not a job. You're the boss when you're an entrepreneur. Another benefit. You got the other side where like, I'm going to do this because I just enjoy it. I love spending my time doing this. It could make me absolutely no money, and I would still enjoy doing this. For me, that is called pickleball. It makes me no money, but I really enjoy it. That is a hobby. What you don't want is a jobby, which is somewhere in those two combined worlds where you're like, I'm gonna do this thing and like maybe it'll make some money. Like you will invariably 99% of the time quit that. Like 6 months from now when things are hard, or 12 months from you get that negative review, or you haven't made any money, or in fact you've put $10,000 into this idea and it's made nothing, right? You're gonna be like, I quit, I'm done, this is not worth it, this is total waste of time. And it's because it was a jobby, right? Whereas if you said, you know what, I'm gonna commit the next 3 years to doing this thing, I'm gonna put $10,000 into this whatever, and I'm just gonna see how it goes. And I'm going to put the work in. I'm going to show up every week consistently. I'm going to publish that podcast every single week on the dot. I'm going to do the things that I've set out to do. You give yourself enough time to like actually have that experience and grow. And so I think first you need to decide, like, is this a hobby or is this something that you're trying to create income from? Is the purpose of this to cut back from medicine and you need to make up for the money you're losing there by doing that? Is the purpose of this just to find growth and meaning and purpose and just have a hobby? That's totally fine. But defining from the outset what that is, I think, is really important. If you decide that it is an entrepreneurial endeavor, I think the first start is to always figure out, like, what am I good at? Right. And I think that the best way to answer that question, there's a few. One of them is to say, like, what do people come to me for advice for? It doesn't take anybody long in my life to realize, like, hey, like, what is Jimmy good at? Well, Jimmy spends 99.9% of days at some point during the day talking about personal finance. That will come up every single day of my life, no matter what I do, where I go, who I'm around. I will get a text, a phone call, an in-person conversation about some random financial question. The reason why is because I like learning about money and I'm really good at teaching it. And so that for me became like, oh, I should start a business, right? Because like I want to teach people about personal finance. Another way to think through this is what is easy for you that is hard for other people. And I think people take this one for granted because they're like, well, nobody would pay me to do that. That's so easy. It's like, well, maybe it's easy for you with a skill set and experience and education that you have. It could be very, very hard for other people. And the reason that that matters is because in the world of entrepreneurship, it's upside down world. Your time is not correlated with the money that you make. You make money based on value that you provide. And so I can work less in a business and make more than someone else by providing value from my experiences, from my education, from the way that I think through things. And so what is easy for you that is hard for other people? And so once you define, like, how much profit do you need to come in from this thing? Like, is it zero because it's a hobby, or do you need to have $50,000 a year to cut back, 20% from your job? And then you figure out, what am I good at? You also have to look at, okay, what is needed out there? Like, is this a problem that people actually want to solve? And I think that that's probably the hardest thing to do in this whole puzzle, to figure out really. And the reason why is because it is super, super common. Ask me how I know, to build something that you're like, people are going to love it. It's going to be a great idea. They're going to buy it like hotcakes. And then they don't. And they're like, okay, I'm going to solve that problem. You know how I'm going to solve the problem? I'm going to go talk to my people, my target audience, and I'm going to ask them what they want. And then you build exactly what they say, and then they still don't want it because humans are human. They don't know what they want, right? And so it turns out that that becomes a bit of a trial and error as it goes, which is why you need to make that commitment. Like, I'm going to do this for 2 years. I'm going to do this for 3 years. And then if after 3 years I haven't reached a goal, then I'll hang it up or I'll do something different, right? But it really comes down to those three things. How much money are we talking about? How much profit do you need to come from this thing? Like, what is your natural propensity? And do people need this? Like, are you solving an actual problem or not, right? Because there's certain problems that people have that they would not pay money for to have solved.
100%.
Just depends on the situation,
Yeah. And I think, for physicians, it's important to also understand that, medical education, medical training is very linear, and there is no linearity to entrepreneurship. It is
None.
all over
Zero.
the place, and you have to be willing to pivot, move, do things. And so, yes, to what are you good at, and what are you willing to be uncomfortable learning how to do? because there's a lot of discomfort in entrepreneurship. And that's the growth. That's where the growth is that we were talking about. And you have to be willing to see your way through the discomfort to the other side in order to build the business, because there are things that we're good at. And then there is a lot that you have to learn along the way. I've learned that.
Yeah. And I think getting that space where you were saying, hey, I know that I have some natural ability at this thing, but also to your point, because you are going to learn so much and you have to learn so much, it is equally important to have a passion about whatever problem you're trying to solve, right? Am I passionate enough to deal with the discomfort, to deal with the unknown, to learn new things that I don't currently know? I mean, I definitely didn't learn how to build a website or, build a podcast or courses or any of that stuff in medical training, right? We don't even talk about money, and so for somebody to be able to overcome that, it has to have enough potential, or you have to be passionate enough, ideally both, to really pursue something.
Well, I've loved this. I enjoyed catching up with you so much. Tell the listeners where they can find you and where they can listen to more of Dr. Jimmy Turner.
Yeah. So if you want to hear my voice and me ramble more than I just did today, you can go to Money Meets Medicine, which is the name of the podcast. Host each week on Wednesdays, and we talk about personal finance topics, career topics in medicine. And there's a website, moneymeetsmedicine.com. You can check that out as well.
Awesome. Dr. Jimmy Turner, thank you so much for being a pivotal part of my journey. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate you. And to the listeners, thank you so much for being here today. I will see you next time on Better Physician Life. Take care.